Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brendan Pugh, and today we have Carrow Brown with us. She has two author names. She writes under Carrow Brown and Faye Black. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about her writing journey. How are you today? Welcome to the show.
I am tired. That's usually the response I give everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much. It's been a long day. For anybody who's watching, I actually have, on top of writing, I have a full-time job as well. So as soon as I get done with the full-time jobs, then I come off and do either the writing or the other stuff, like getting to talk to great people like you.
Yeah, it's always those full-time jobs. I still have a full-time job too, and you gotta do it. But it's also want to do all this stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because if not to launch straight into topics or anything like that, but it's like you can't just like be like a writer in like your writing cave anymore, right?
Mhm.
Like just sitting there and making words and sending them to publishers. Like they're doing a lot more of like the outbound marketing onto authors, so it's like they have to deal with a lot more of the business side now than they did like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And what's really sad about that is that when I run into like aspiring writers right now, they just think that that's not going to happen. And I'm like,
Mhm.
you're going to have to. Sorry.
Yeah. It seems like everyone I talk to, like the marketing and putting yourself out there is like the thing that they hate doing the most.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, if you think about it, most authors are introverts, right? And while
Mhm.
we like to be around people that, we're very close to, asking us to like talk to 500 strangers like in the course of 2 hours is like nightmare fuel for us.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
for sure. I'm very much an extrovert, but when it does come to writing, it's like all of a sudden I become introverted. Like it's like I don't know if I want to share or talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit how you got started and when you started writing, and then kind of how you ended up doing what you're doing now.
So my saga starts forever ago. So I'll try to summarize it as much as I can. I actually didn't learn to read or write until I was 10. And that was due to like multiple factors that were going on in my life. And when I finally, and it was one of these things where I found reading to be like the most ostentatious thing to do because like everybody wanted me to do it and I didn't want to do it. And so like the more like you push kids to do things they don't want to do, like the more
Mm.
resistance they get, right? And my gateway into reading was actually comic books, right? Because you have to read the dialogue to really understand what's going on. So once I started reading comic books, so the ones I really got into was actually Sonic the Hedgehog by Archie, right? And then I found out that they had like little booklets that went with it. So I got the booklets, and the next thing you know, I'm reading like everything. You can't like all the books I was gobbling them up like Cookie Monster, right? And so, but that didn't transfer into writing. What ended up happening is I think I was in fifth grade. Yeah. I was in fifth grade and I read this book for a book report, and I was really fed up because the ending of the book was so abrupt that I was extremely dissatisfied with it. And there was nothing in the book or the publication to indicate that there was going to be a book two, right?
Mhm. Which is
So
always the
I,
worst.
yeah. So I was just reading it and I was like, this is like, and at one point, like my teacher could see my face and she's like, what's wrong? I was like, this is like the most shit ending I have ever read. And so she told me for my project, what I could do is I could rewrite the ending of the book and then that would count towards my final project. So therefore, I wrote my first 10 pages of author stuff. So that made me feel really good.
It's
Um,
awesome.
and then kind of on and off after that, I wasn't like really into it until high school because I kept reading like really bad books and I kept like wanting to rewrite them like I did with that one, right?
Mhm.
And my English teacher really hated me because because the English teacher, the one that I had, would want us to write like a page of using the vocabulary words in a sentence. So I would turn in like 20 pages of story with like the vocab words like kind of like snuck in there, right?
Yeah.
So she
Right.
would have to read it. I wouldn't even like bold or highlight, like she'd have to actually look for it, right?
Right.
But then I joined the military, and the military kind of killed a lot of the drive to read or write. And it wasn't until probably like 5 years later I started getting into it again, but it was for fan fiction because I was like, this is easier to do. So I was really into doing DBZ fan fiction. I was really into doing Zelda and what was the other one? No, it's just those two. Those were like the two main ones. I tried to dabble in like two other things, and I was just like, nah. And then the big book effort happened actually when I used to be a teacher because one of the things that they told us in orientation is that you should have a second job, right?
Right.
So I was like, that's the beginning of the end. Like my first year, it's like, don't forget to like make sure that you scheduled out your second job accordingly. So I thought a
Yeah.
book would be good passive second income. I've learned more since then.
Right.
But so, I spent a year writing my first book, which is called Queen of Swords and Silence, and it got accepted by a publisher and it is still published, but it's under my name now. And that is where like the giant professional author learning curve really started. And I learned some things through good advice, through hard experience, and I probably have a lot more to learn. So that was really condensing all of that there.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a lot there to unpack. What First off, thank you for your service. What branch of the military were you in?
Air Force. Chair
Air
Force, as
Force.
we like to say it. Yeah.
Nice. I'm from a military family, so my dad was in for 30 years and in the National Guard here in Iowa, and my brother's still in. My grandparent, everyone, whole family line. So that's awesome. So I love that you talked about the kind of learning to read and write a little later because so my daughter is 10 right now and she can read and write, but she really has struggled to get into reading. Like it's kind of one of those she can and she does, but she just really like she doesn't want to read a book or whatever. So she found the Dog Man books. I don't know if you've ever seen those. They're kind of like a graphic novel, and she loves them. And so that was kind of like she finally found something that she loved to actually read and get.
Yeah, and that's the trick because like I think as adults, because we have like a more cultivated reading experience, that we think that there's certain books that we really like that the kids are gonna like them as well, realizing that we're not actually like 8 or 10 year olds that with different priorities, right? And there's always like this stigmatism about like graphic novels as well, especially with kids, because we still have like this mentality that it is like for children, right? But even kids' books can discuss like really adult topics. Like I actually have one here. So this is actually by the daughter of one of the artists that I work with over at Rippaverse. His name is Kanan White, and her name is Samantha White. And so she made this beautiful children's book, and it talks about grief. So when you lose somebody dear, and it talks about it from like the point of view of like a child, right?
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. It's called A Piece of You, and it has to do with a child when she's reflecting about the loss of her loved one, while the sweater that she has is like slowly unraveling. So all she has left is like a thread, right? Yeah, and so like I think people forget that there are like really important topics that we can discuss in this medium, but because we're so fixed that cartoons are for kids, we forget that.
Yeah, definitely. I am. I'm all for really any medium. I think any medium can tell a great story, and it's all about the intent behind it and what you want. And to me, again, it's like for my daughter, it's like I just wanted her to read something. So for her to find that and do that, I think is great. So do so you have a book that's published traditionally, but are most of your other ones self-published then?
Yeah, so everything at this point is all published through me. So and it's a little tricky for me to talk about it. So the best way I can say it is that I am legally under requirement to not talk about it.
Okay.
But so basically, I had a publisher that had my book. We went through a thing, and now I've got my book rights back. So, but before then, I was traditionally published. I was actually going to be I was published through a smaller house, but they've since closed, which you're going to find is really common because unfortunately making money in publishing is really hard. So lots of publishing, smaller ones will start. And then if they don't get enough traction within like 2 years, they have to close down. Right. And then I was with another one that was kind of mixed media, and don't know if they're still around or not. But then pretty much since then, I've just done it all through me because I have full creative control, which is the pro. And then the con is that I have full creative control.
Right.
So, yeah. When you start self-publishing and you get really familiar with like the business aspects of it, it really changes like the whole way that you write. Because I think when we originally start writing, we're very whimsical with it. We're kind of like, I'm just going to write some words and put some characters in there. But then when you move into like the business side of it, you'll sit there and start writing, and then you stop and be like, is my target audience actually going to read this passage? Because I don't think they are. Right.
Yeah. So. It's kind of that, it's that balance between, like, I think why self-publishing really works for a lot of people right now is you can write the story you want to tell. You're not put into a box just because you're with a publisher, but that also, you still have to write something good, so you can't fool yourself. So you gotta be kind of, there's a middle ground there of like, you got to write something that's going to work for people, but also remain true to what you want to write.
Yeah, like some would say that this was a tasteless thing that I did. But like, in 2020, I wrote a short story. It's called Quarantined with My Avatar, right? And originally I was going to have it be part of an anthology because like during that time, like everybody was really stressed out. And so like I thought like, what if we all just get together and make a story, and then that way we'll take our mind off of things, right?
Mhm.
The anthology didn't come around, but I did finish my story. And so a lot of people didn't want to read it when it came out in 2020 because they're like, quarantined is not a good word. It was like a bad word at that time.
Yeah.
But I still did it, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I still had like the theme of at some point you're quarantined for some reason in there.
Mhm.
So that was it. It doesn't sell very well, but it was definitely something that I wanted to put out there. So as long as you go in knowing that it's probably not going to hit the market the way that you want, then you're fine. If you go in like thinking I'm going to make buku bucks and I'm going to be on the night show or something like that, then that's just delusional.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I want to come back to maybe some of the business side, but let's maybe talk about, so how do you get started with the story? Like, how do ideas come to you? And then are you kind of an outliner? Do you just kind of write it as you go and see what happens? Like, kind of what's your process for that?
So I'm definitely an outliner. I've got that down to a fine science. Like, I understand. I've done a lot of reading on story beats and story structure. I've played around with like different story structures. Like there's a Japanese one, then we have our modern Western one, which is the rising climax and stuff like that. And ultimately what happens is if I get an idea, I'll jot it down, right? I know Stephen King has this thing where it's like if you sleep on it, it's still there, then it's good. But I'll throw it like on a notepad and chuck it somewhere. And if I really want to come back to it, I'll still remember it and I'll go find it in the notepad, right? But for me to really want to do something, I have to love the idea. Like I have to be like super passionate about it. I can't be kind of like, maybe this would work. I have to like feel it. And a good example of that is probably going to be a book that I wrote under Faye Black. It's called Roll D20. And that is a romance story about two, I want to call them nerds, right? One's a game store owner. The other one is an artist in the industry. So they're the ones that do all of like the posters for games and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I basically wrote about their love story coming together. And just to give you an idea of how much I love this idea, I outlined the whole thing in one day, right? And then I wrote the whole book in 1 week.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was like how hungry I was for it. So if you're not like hungry to like write your story, then it's kind of hard to like really go after it. If you're doing like that kind of like I keep using the word whimsical, right? Because that's how it feels to me.
Yeah.
But if you're kind of being kind of like nilly with it, and you're kind of like, oh, maybe I'll put this in there, or maybe I'll do that. Like, no, man, this thing's kind of like grab you by the neck and shake you around and be like, fucking for it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Just saw a post or like a quote or something. I think it was from C.S. Lewis, and this is not like totally accurate, but basically what he said was like, don't become a writer just to become a writer. Like you have to become a writer because there's a story you want to tell or that you want to tell good stories. Because if you want to just be a writer to be a writer, it's going to be very hard and lonely, and you're going to hate it the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you really gotta feel that fire. And even if I know I gave you the example of I wrote the whole book in a week, you don't have to write it in a week. But that's just like how big I was on it. Like, as long as you're kind of like, I can't wait to write this, or I'm so excited to do this scene or this moment, like I was dreaming about it. Like that's fantastic. I would, go for it.
Yeah, I definitely I haven't had that with a whole project. So I've got a prequel that I'm working on and then my book one. So I definitely have parts where like I get stuck and then I'm not sure what to do and I struggle, but then there are certain times where I get like a scene or a certain amount of scenes where I'm just like I can get it done in a couple hours and you just power through it, So that's always a good feeling.
It is. It's like such a great high because you walk out of like wherever it is that you're writing, being like, I feel great and I feel kind of drunk and I need a drink.
Yeah, for sure. So where did having the two author names come from?
So that was a recommendation from one of my other author friends who's been doing it for a lot longer than me. Because at one point I read a book I didn't like. It was a romance book, and I said I want to write a romance book, but Carrow Brown does not write romance. Carrow Brown usually writes like horror or action or sci-fi, right? So she told me in order to avoid audience confusion to make another pen name. And then she started telling me I was going to have to set up like a separate newsletter and another website and all this other shit. And I was like, that's way too much work. I'm just not doing that.
Yeah.
But I did make a separate name. And on my website, I make it clear one is for one thing and the other one's for the other. So that way people don't have to wonder which book is which. So that's why I have two. Yeah.
No, it makes sense. I think I've heard that before from other people too, where it's just like, if you really want to change genres, having
Mhm.
multiple names helps. Because didn't J.K. Rowling do that? She's got one that's like,
She's got two. She's got the two that we know of. I think she's got a third one somewhere because
yeah,
I found that authors, when they kind of reach like that level of like notoriety, they're always wondering if people are buying the book because their name is on it or because they like the story, right?
sure,
Stephen King did that too. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's like a third book name out there with her stuff
yeah,
on it that
that just
nobody
nobody
knows
knows about. Yeah, because I
about.
think when she came out with the one that's like Robert something, whatever that one
Yeah.
is, I think when all the books like still had on them her name, J.K. Rowling or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't surprise me if she had one out there that nobody knows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of your speaking of J.K. Rowling and Stephen King and everything? What are some of your like earlier influences? Like what kind of stuff did you like growing up?
Garth Nix. I really like Garth Nix. He wrote these beautiful young adult. I say that like young adult is kind of like a tricky area. He wrote young adult before it got taken over by 40-year-old women.
Right.
But it's really good, like high dark fantasy, and discusses like kind of like death and like dealing with death and moving on from it. And it's got like a whole like it's a beautiful magic system as well. If you like magic systems,
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend Garth Nix. That's really good. I actually read a lot of Stephen King when I was a teenager, but the reason I read a lot of Stephen King is because when I was growing up, my parents were really particular about what television that I was going to watch,
Mm-hmm.
because they were like, we're not going to let you watch this garbage, not knowing that the internet would become the garbage.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't watch a lot of it, and I lived out in the middle of a farm area, so I didn't really have a lot in terms of entertainment. I didn't have friends, I couldn't go anywhere, so I read a lot. And I think I read, like, at the time, Stephen King had like 52 books out. I read all 52 books at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after that, I went to the library and I asked the librarian, it's like, this is what I like to read. What shelf am I starting on? And so I just started working my way through the entire library at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, Garth Nix has got like a soft place for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all that. I've said this a bunch of times, so everyone knows this, but I when I was that like 8 to 12, that was when like the Lord of the Rings movies came out and Star Wars, the prequels came out, and X-Men and like all of those, like Pokemon started and Yu-Gi-Oh and everything. So I was just destined for nerddom. Like I just couldn't get away from it for sure.
Yeah, I remember I read Lord of the Rings before the movies came out because I knew that they were based off of books, but then when the film was going to come out, I was like, I might as well read what I'm about to go watch, right?
Yeah.
And I remember it was so funny because my dad had read them too, and he didn't tell me anything. But at one point, like I was like sitting there with like this far off look in my face, and he was like, "Do you not like it?" And I was like, "I don't know, Dad. Like I just got past like the 10 pages of history about the tree, and then I just got past the 5 pages of the song about the tree, and now we're doing 2 pages of speaking like trees. Like I think I'm done."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I was 12 when my dad took me to see Fellowship with my older brother. And I remember I was 12 because my brother exclaimed to the theater, "Dad, he's not 13," to the whole, but I remember going to that and being totally blown away. And then I immediately went and got the other two and read them like immediately, like without putting them down. And so that I think kind of sealed the deal for sure.
Yeah, he did such a good job because Tokenese, right? We all know like why the book was written, and the whole reason he wrote the book was because he was developing a language, and the only reason you can have language is if there's culture and history and whatnot behind it, which is why there's like what we would call info dumping, right? There's a whole bunch of that in there, but it's to give his language that body that it would otherwise lack. So if you read it knowing that, it's beautiful. If you're reading it not knowing that, you're gonna like sit there wondering why we're still on page 10 of talking about trees.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm getting in the I've been slowly getting the redoing the history of Middle Earth books. Like there's like 12 of them, whatever. And I've not ever read all of those, so I'm starting to read through that. And I'm a big world building person, so I just love like all of I don't like I was the one who didn't mind that there's like 10 pages of talking about a tree. Like I just find it fascinating. But so what would you say? I suppose this probably mostly fits for the fantasy side of things. Is like world building one of your favorites? Is dialogue? Like, what's kind of your favorite part to write of a story?
I like dialogue, and there's a beautiful book. It's written by Scott Bell and Scott James. Scott Bell. I think it's Scott Bell. I'm probably missing part of his name in there. He's the kind of guy that's got like 3 first names as his whole name, right?
I think I have a book of his, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote How to Write Dazzling Dialogue. And so when I was first venturing into the writing craft and I realized that I wasn't hot shit when it came to writing, I was like, maybe I should read what other people have to say about it, right? And just maybe get something from that. The one line I took from that book was that treat all dialogue like a fencing contest, right? So whenever you have 2 characters that are talking, like the conversation has to have purpose and it has to have some kind of conflict, because when we're writing dialogue in a book, it has to be for entertainment. It can't just be like completely casual. Like something has to come out of it. So part of what I do as my side gig is I actually edit. And so I always warn people like dialogue is probably what I'm going to hit you on the hardest, because that's my specialty. And I'll focus on like a whole bunch of things like, what purpose does this dialogue serve? In one case, I was reading a manuscript from one individual, and I was like, probably in your head, these characters sound really different, but on the page, they sound similar. And if you think that you might suffer from that, I would ask, if you have like Word, have it read it back to you, because when you are not internally reading it and the machine is reading it, you're going to pick up that it all sounds the same.
Yeah. I'm sure I still am not great at it and I struggle with it today, but like making characters sound different and be different, and also writing characters that are different than yourself. Like especially when you first start writing, that was such a huge, like, I remember writing something and I gave it to my brother who he writes, and he's kind of someone I write with regularly. And he read it and he goes, there's some good stuff here, but basically all the characters are exactly the same,
Yeah.
And I feel like it's such a tough thing.
It can be. Here's a really good example, and I don't mean to make fun of this author, but they're well established and they have a TV show, so I think at this point they're beyond my mockery. But The Killing Floor, which is what the Reacher show is based off of, if you actually read that, they all sound like Midwestern Americans, including the cop that's from Chicago. Right? So that's a good example of how they all sound similar. Sometimes I always want to recommend that folks maybe watch like a TV show, but now TV shows have gotten to the point where they over exaggerate diction to the point where it's like a stereotype. So I wouldn't recommend that either. I would say like listen to like Lifetime like radio, or you can listen to streamers, right? For anybody that's listening, my boss, Eric D. July, right? Sometimes he'll get like a written interview request. And so what I'll do is I'll be like, do you want me to answer this for you? And he'll be like, yeah, go ahead and do it, right? And so what I'll do is I'll listen to him stream for a little bit and pick back up on his syntax and his diction, and I'll start writing like him.
Yeah. It's amazing how I've done that where, so like I'll be writing or whatever, and say at the time I'm reading, like this example, I'll be reading like Harry Potter. Then all of a sudden my writing starts sounding like Harry Potter, and then you start reading something else and then it like morphs. So I've gone back and like read my stuff I've written. And I'm like, oh, I can tell what book I was reading when I wrote this part of the story.
Yeah. That can be fun to do if you're writing like different POVs from a first person point of view, because obviously everybody's going to think differently. Six of Crows actually did that beautifully. It was like multiple POVs, and even like the narration, even though it was third person, was still told from like the standpoint of the person that it was with, and I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah. There's a lot of great, like I read or saw something about like a really great writing exercise is to take a classic book, like something like Lord of the Rings or something that you want to kind of learn to write like, and just transcribe it like in a notebook, just to like, so you can basically feel what it's like to write something like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty cool.
That would be good. I would do that.
So let's get into kind of back to the business stuff. Marketing. So this is what I always hear people just hate the most. And how do you go about that? And then what would be some tips that you might have, like maybe 2 or 3 tips for people about like how to get started anyways?
What's really funny is somebody was actually just talking to me about this on Discord, so I'm ready for you.
Perfect.
In this example, basically when this person spoke to me, they're like, do you have any tips for marketing a product? And so I was like, what's your product? Right? It's like, it's a book. It's like, what kind of book? Like, what is it? Right? And then I was like, okay, who's your intended audience for the book? And it's like, that's a good question. I was like, yes, it is. Right.
Yeah.
And so I basically started asking more questions about who the target audience was. And that's really important. So you want to identify not just one person that you want to read your book, because you're going to have your intended reader and then you're going to have two other people, right? An example of my intended reader depends on what I'm writing, but usually my first intended reader is my husband, right? And that's a really hard intended reader because he really doesn't like to read, right?
Mm.
So when I write something, I'm writing for a hard to reach audience in hopes that he'll look at it, right? But then I've got my two backups. So, but you want to know what kind of books they read, where they hang out at, what other things do they do, like what are they interested in, right? Mm-hmm. And then you want to ask yourself, like, my favorite questions, what about your book makes it better than a latte, right? So if somebody has to make a choice between buying a latte from Starbucks or buying your book, what is it about your book that's going to promise that's better? As in, how does it not suck, right?
Yeah.
And so that comes from Seven Figure Fiction by T. Taylor. Now, she usually talks more about buttering up stories. If you're into that, it's actually a really good book. I like it a lot as far as storycraft goes. But that's always a good question. Like, if you have $7, right, where are you going to spend it at, and why is your thing better?
Yeah. So. Yeah, I really love that. That's awesome. I've never really heard it said like that, but I really like that. I'm similar. My wife, she loves sci-fi fantasy. Like, she'll watch movies and stuff, but she's not really she doesn't really like reading a book or anything like that. Mm-hmm. She likes reading self-help or nonfiction stuff, but like, she's just not one to sit down and read a big fantasy book or something. So I always am like, if something I write, if I can get her to really like it, then
it's a win.
It's a win. Yeah. That's fun. So how long now have you been? You talked about you wrote something in the pandemic. So when did you publish your first thing?
2019.
2019. So it's been, what is that? 6 years, 4 or 5 years now? Yeah. That's awesome. How do you have a process for like, beta readers? You mentioned that you do editing as well. So like, do you have an editor that does your stuff separate from you? Yeah,
I do. So I try not to bother my editor until I actually have like a fully completed manuscript. But one thing I'm going to tell you, and this might cause some controversy, I make sure that my editor is currently available on Fiverr. And the reason I do that is because sometimes an editor has life happen, right? And I understand that life happens, but I also understand that I paid you, right? And so if for some reason my editor ghosts me, which has happened before to me in the past, I can at least talk to Fiverr and be kind of like, hey, non-responsive, can I get my stuff back, right? So that's one thing that I do. And I know, like I said, that's probably going to upset some people, but unfortunately, on the writing and the editing and even on art side, that happens with a big frequency. So I always need some kind of fallback on that.
Yeah.
But once I know that my author or my editor is available, I send them the manuscript, and I don't really have an established timeline after that because life happens. And so sometimes if an editor's like, yeah, I'll get your book done in a month, I would probably tack on like 2 more months just to be safe. Mm-hmm. And then usually around that time frame, I'll get it back.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. That's always, it's one of those unfortunate things where it's like, you want to have faith in people, but you also got to protect yourself too. It's just kind of the unfortunate necessity of being in the creative fields.
Yeah. But before it goes to the editor, if the intended reader is my husband, then I'll send it to him and I'll be like, what do you like? What do you not like? Right. And he's pretty savage. He'll be kind of like, this is boring. I wouldn't read it. And I'll be like, okay, I'll just edit it quietly now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I've got 2 critique partners. And if they're not like bogged down with stuff, I'll be like, can you like look at 5 pages and tell me if this is shit or not? And they'll tell me. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I have 4 brothers, and we're all big fantasy, sci-fi, like all that kind of stuff. And I remember saying in a video once that I was going to have them be my first round of beta readers. And someone commented like, well, having your family be, that's kind of cheating. Like, what if they aren't, tell you the truth or whatever? And I was like, no. Mm-hmm. They will be savage. Mm-hmm. Like they don't care about my feelings at all.
Good. Those are the good ones to have.
Yeah. And they want it to be good. And they also are very honest with their opinions. So good to have those people.
Yeah. I'm kind of jealous, but I get it.
Yeah. So are you currently working on a project? Do you have anything here? Maybe here's a double part question. Are any of your books in kind of a connected world? Like, do you have like a series or anything? And if not, like, is there a reason for that? Or
Under Carrow Brown, all my stories are in a Carrowverse, or I call it a clusterverse because it's a clusterfuck in there, right? But at some point, it's all tied together. It just may not be in the exact same timeline, kind of thing.
right?
In regards to what I have in the works right now, so like this sounds like I have a lot going on, and I do, but I write, I edit, I also ghostwrite, which is an interesting experience. I finished ghostwriting this year a trilogy for a client, and I'm waiting for the client to finish reviewing it right now before I go back and edit it because it's not my property, right? So I need them to tell me what they want to change before I can finalize it. And so what I'm doing right now is, because that was kind of like a contemporary story, I've presently switched my brain into something sci-fi. So that way when I go back to it, it'll be like a complete refresh and I'm not like super immersed in it. And I even changed the medium on that too, because so the client project was long form, which is industry talk for novels. And so what I was writing is a script right now. And when you do a lot of writing, sometimes like flipping back and forth like that is a good reset. Other people just like don't write for a month. I don't know how you do that, but you do.
Yeah, I like having a few projects to switch between. Just like, because sometimes I'll be writing something and I get stuck, and then I'm like, I don't know how to fix this. So for the series I'm writing, I have a few planned later. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll jump and I'll write like a scene in a future book that probably maybe I'll never even use, but it just kind of jogs my brain a little bit.
Yeah, I get that. I think Stephen King in his book called that Men in the Basement, where when you ask them to move other things, it makes stuff fall into place where it needs to be.
Yeah. Do you find switching genres can be difficult? Like if you're writing, like a literary fiction, then you go to, sci-fi back to romance. Like, can it be jarring, or do you handle that pretty well?
I feel like I handle it pretty well, although I will say probably with the romance, it's a little bit more of a lighthearted tone. So when I go back into it with like, my serious sci-fi horror stuff and like I get the narrative in there, I'll usually catch myself being like, delete, try again. So that's probably the friction point on that.
Yeah. What's I haven't talked to anyone about ghostwriting, so obviously you probably can't say anything about your clients or whatever, but how did you get into ghostwriting, and then what's kind of the process of that?
So what happened with that was, I've been publishing since 2019, right? And I've not been shy about putting my books out there. And what happened was somebody approached me before my current client, and they were kind of like, hey, I've read some of your work. I can't write. Literally could not write, right? Like did not have the physical means to write.
Right.
But they were like, can you, if I tell you what I'm looking for, can you go ahead and like make it for me? And I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of how I initially got into ghostwriting. That was like a short story. I typed it, made like $50, and that was the start of it, right? With this particular client, they did review my work, obviously, because they wanted to see if my writing style matched the theme of what they were looking for. And when we started having talks, I was like, what are 3 other books that you want this book to be comparable to? So they gave me those 3 books. I read those 3 books, right? Because if you're going to write for a particular audience, it's always good to know what it is that audience reads as well. So I read that, I made some notes, and then I had a meeting with them to go over like the general outline of what they were going for. And my last client was actually really nice because they just kind of like let the reins go and like said, have fun, right? I had a lot of fun.
Yeah,
a lot.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But the longer part is I have to wait for them to get through it. And I wrote 3 books. They're anywhere between 100 and 115,000 words long. So they're not just going to read it like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
It's going to take a little while.
Yeah. And the reason I did it that way, and the reason I pitched it that way, was because there was 3 books in the series. And I said, if I write something in book 3 that I want to have a breadcrumb for earlier, it's best that we don't have that book published so I can do all the jumping around that I need to do then.
Yeah. So you wrote them all at the same time?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wrote them in order. I wrote book 1, book 2, book 3, but it's book 3 where it ends up going back and having to plant like those Easter eggs before.
Yeah.
So it's honestly, I thought that was a lot of fun. I also had to like check and be like, I want to do this. And they're like, we don't know about that. It's like, pretty please.
Yeah. There's an author, Michael J. Sullivan. Have you heard of him? He was the first one I've seen that openly talks about this, anyways. Where, like he says in the beginning of his book, that he writes his series. So he did like a 5-book series. He writes all of it before he publishes any of it. And I was like, man, that is so cool to me, because you can do that. You can go back and be like, okay, hey, there's a thing in book 4 that I want to, put something in book 1, and I just think it's smart. I think it's probably hard, but smart.
It's easier. What's hard is when you write book 1 and then you do stuff in book 2 and it wasn't in book 1, right?
And you can't change it.
Yeah, you can't change it. Like, I hate saying this, but like Dune, right? For example. Yeah. So like in Dune 1, which, great legacy book right there.
Yeah.
It was very bare bones in terms of like interpersonal relationships, right? But then we get into book 2 and suddenly it's like, oh man, my best friend is dead. I can't deal with this. And it was like, you didn't give 2 tosses in book 1 about your best friend that's dead. Like, so yeah.
Well, I think a good example too would be Harry Potter. Like there's a lot of things in that where I think she had like a lot of the bones and like kind of the structure of how she wanted the story to go and like the ending. But there's definitely a lot of details where it's kind of like, that's a retcon and that doesn't quite fit.
Yeah,
and
I don't remember that.
Yeah, there's a couple of, especially when you get some of the magic bits and then they talk about earlier stuff, and I'm like, that doesn't quite.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't really happen that way. So, well, I think it's really cool. So, how long did those 3 take you then?
About 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then was that like did you write it once and then send it back, or did you kind of write it once, go over it again, do a few drafts, or just kind of first draft?
So what I did was I wrote the entire first draft of book 1 and then I sent it, and then I was like, do you want me to wait? Like, what do you want to do? And then they get back to me right away. So I was like, I'm going to just go, right? Like I just kept going. Because, I mean, even if I had to change smaller details, like the meat of the story would still be there. So if I have to go back and like do like a bunch of tiny revisions, that's fine. But yeah, so it took me about 5 months, and then I would send it in chunks. And yeah. So I think some people like it by chapters, but I would say if you can do like the whole project at once, then go ahead and do it that way.
Yeah. I really like how Brandon Sanderson's been structuring his Stormlight archive novels. I don't know if you've read any of those.
I'm a big Sanderson fan, but that is not the one I've gotten into yet. I've been I challenged myself to read The Dark Tower. Yeah. I haven't finished it.
I just finished Tress of the Emerald Sea, which was
that was good.
My gosh, it was so good. It was so just whimsical, to use your word from before. Like it was just such a light, fun story.
Yeah, I really did like the fairy tale narrative style that he used in that. I thought that was beautiful, and I really liked. It was like I have the book right there, but I really, even though there was like one part where I was like, I think I know what that is. I think it's this thing. But even though I kind of predicted what that twist was going to be, I was still satisfied by it, which is it's a good way to say that you wrote it real well. Yeah.
Yeah. The Stormlight books, they're kind of broken up into it's like each book has like 5 parts. So, but I like that because they're so long. I'm a slow reader too. So like they're so long that it's kind of it's like 5 books in one. So you can kind of like, okay, I read part 1. So I can like take a break for a minute, then read part 2. And yeah, I just like how he's everything he does is very intentional. It feels like.
It is, yeah. No, he knows exactly what he's doing when he goes in there. I still remember. I don't know if you know like his full history, but he's like really big on like the hard magic system, which we all know about. But what's funny is that we all found that out when he went on a panel to talk about magic systems. He's like, "No, you should tell your entire audience how it works." And all the other authors on the panel were like, "No, you fool!"
Yeah, yeah. And then here he is being like the biggest fantasy author right now ever. Yeah. Where do you sit on soft versus hard magic systems?
I think it depends on what you're writing. I am going to say if you want to use a hard magic system and you're going to outline it like that, you should make it part of the plot. Yeah. Right? Same thing with science. If you're going to be like really big into the science of your story, Andy Weir does it beautifully. Yeah. Project Hail Mary, like, I'm not going to lie, like some of Andy Weir's books, like if I had not taken like the levels of science in college that I did, I'd probably be like, I don't know what I'm reading. Yeah. But what I really love about Andy Weir is that even though he spends the time explaining the science, like that science ends up circling back and being kind of like, oh shit, we're fucked. Yeah. Sanderson does that really well, like especially in Stormlight, like the magic systems
part of the story.
Hmm.
My brother read, I haven't read it yet. It's Christopher Paolini's Fractal Noise. Is that what it's called?
That sounds familiar. I don't think I've read it yet.
He put out a, like, whatever his science fiction book is, and he texts me like in the middle of reading it, and he's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm smart enough to read this book. Like, I don't really know if I get the science that he's talking about here.
I'm like that with another author. Let me find his name real quick.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of, I like card magic systems, but I also like a little bit of like the Gandalf stuff where it's like, I don't know how he does that.
He just shows up like light,
Yeah.
like, okay, we're good.
Yeah, and then he just like fights the Balrog with his staff somehow, and you're just like, okay, cool. You know?
Yeah, I mean, Harry Potter is also a good soft magic system, even though people are like, it's not soft. It's like, but it is, because it doesn't make sense. You don't understand. Like, somebody cast a spell. Where did the energy for the spell come from? Like,
yeah, it's just somewhere.
Yeah, but like, so Blake Crouch, he's a really good one that I like as well. Everybody knows him right now for the TV show that he came out with, but he wrote a really heavy science book. It's called Upgrade, not the movie.
Mhm.
Yeah, like there were parts in there where I was like, I had to stop and like look something up on Wikipedia because I was like, I think it's this thing. I'm not quite sure. I don't want to be stupid. But the whole thing is with that book is it's actually like not to give it away, but it's about a guy that basically gets injected with like nanobots, right?
Right.
That purposely make him intelligent, and so you can see it in the narrative where he goes to talking like your average pleb, right, to like all the way like where it's like his vernacular is so advanced where I'm sitting here being like, I don't know what the fuck you just said.
Right. Like, what are you saying? Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I don't know if I could ever. I don't know if I could ever write a sci-fi like that. It's too advanced for me. That's why I like fantasy, because I can just make it all up.
No.
Yeah.
I think the great thing about science fiction is that at some point it can become science reality, right? Because we see science fiction as like, there's no way we could do that. It's like, oh, but give us 10 years because we'll want to do it.
Yeah.
Like, cell phones, right? Like, I think our first, I can't remember what movie it was where they were just having like little tiny devices and stuff like that. And we're like, we can do that. We can make it happen. And so that's like, yeah.
Yeah, so my wife and I recently opened a bookstore in our small town, and my brother was up there. He was helping me do some stuff, and my another brother called me, and I answered it on my watch, like an Apple Watch.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just had this whole conversation of like, we live in Star Trek, like we're there, Mm-hmm. So that's one of my favorite things about Star Trek too, is that it's like, this could be the future. Like, this is like where we're headed. So yeah.
Yeah, Picard had his tablet in his office, like just going through reports and stuff like that. I've got 3 tablets now.
Yeah. Yeah, just having the whole, like, remember, used to like having a calculator watch was fun, and now we can.
I thought that was so cool. Like, you could like to do times table on my wrist. Man, so cool. Yeah.
Now I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, you totally were a nerd, like, because I wanted a calculator watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fun. We're coming up about 45 minutes, pushing an hour here. So for my last question, I like to always kind of ask, what would be your top 2 or 3, maybe 4 big tips for if someone is new to writing or they're just getting into maybe publishing? What would you tell them about the writing process?
I would say for new writers, I would encourage you to read and do. So read a lot and do a lot, because a lot of the stuff that we write from does actually come from experience. So even if it's something that's like fantasy based, like, and you have no experience with it, like maybe find a way to have experience. Like if you're writing about hobbits, like hiking across a mountain, have you ever hiked across a mountain? Maybe give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can write about achy feet and blisters on feet and stuff like that. Read a lot, especially like there's back and forth discussion if you should read your genre while you're writing your genre, but you should definitely read the genre that you are writing. And the reason I say that is because there's expectations within each genre. And if you're not, I don't want to say checking boxes, but if you're not fulfilling that, your audience is going to notice and they're going to make a comment about it. So, like, here's one, right? Romances, get this, have a happy ending, right?
Right.
If the romance doesn't have a happy ending, it's not a romance, right? Now, I know that's probably like, duh, but I've had to explain that so many times because there's one person where when they wrote their romance, it was mythology based, but they had the lady eat the guy and then had her walk off into the sunset, and she thought that was romantic. And I was like, no, that's called horror. That's what you wrote. Like, literally.
Right.
Yeah. So you have to know that, right? Another example would be like urban fantasy. So urban fantasy, kind of like what Jim Butcher writes, Jenna Frost, so on and so forth. Within that genre, there is the expectation of the hidden world, right? Mm-hmm. So we have the mundane world where us like mortal beings are like kind of sitting here complaining about taxes and whatnot. And then under that, we have like, the mythological people that are like fighting to the death to save all of humanity for some reason, but they're hiding it from us.
Right.
So if you have an urban fantasy, but you don't have the hidden realm part, people are going to be kind of like, so what exactly is this? Right? Also, like with world-ending stuff, like there's always going to have to be the talk about like resources, shelter, things like that. Mm-hmm. So general thoughts there. Business-wise, target audience, we kind of talked about that a little bit. I would say, I'm thinking about the things that I find people run into a lot. When your book is not successful, don't be afraid to ask why. Right? Mm-hmm. If you know that you wrote something and you really loved it, but it's not doing very well, go look into why it's not doing well. And that's not to say that the writing's not doing well, but it might be your blurb is not good. It might be your keywords are not good, right? Maybe your cover's off, right? So go look at those things. And then I guess also on the cover front, like make sure that when you design your cover that you can see it like bite size, right? Because a lot of people, when they're looking for covers right now, they're not actually in a bookstore like the one that you own. Yeah. They're looking at it online. So they have to be able to see the prominent elements of your cover along with the title and all of the other stuff. So, and a cover designer would probably cover that with you, but a lot more people are trying to do it their own because they're trying to save money, which I respect if that's what you want to do. Just know what it is that you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Very similar to just like doing YouTube. Like you got to have the thumbnail and the title and the description. Like it's all got to kind of, and then the content actually has to be good. Like it's actually, it may not, like that you said that, like it may not even be the writing. It could just be the package that it's in. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will tell you, being an independent author on Amazon is really tough. I know, I'll tell you why, because that's not a secret. Amazon actually has a deal cut out with the big publishers right now that anytime you search for a keyword, the traditional houses will show up first, and then everything else will show up after that. One time I decided to just put my name in there, right, expecting my book to show up at some point. My book showed up under number 3, right? It's my book. It's got my name on it.
Right.
Right. But what happened? But the 2 books that showed up before that were traditional published books.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so much of that that's, that's actually something I really give Brandon Sanderson props for, of when he did his secret projects and he didn't put them out on Audible. Like even he was like, hey, this isn't really working.
I can complain about that. Yeah, no, so like not to get into like a rant. I had a book on Audible, and I fully funded it, as in I paid for all of it.
Yeah.
And I went through and got it hosted up on Audible and everything else like that. And so when it came to me trying to pick the price of the book, Audible told me no. Audible wouldn't let me decide the price of my book.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. And then on top of that, they would just randomly put my stuff on sale and not notify me. So then my royalties would go down, right? Mm-hmm. And then when I asked about it, it's like, oh, well, we're trying to make your book more marketable by putting it on sale. I was like, like maybe talk to me about it. And then they throw out like that terms of service.
Yeah.
But
so it's like you got into the self-publishing game to be in control, and then they're like not letting you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're essentially a publisher right now. And then I ended up taking my book down because they sent me this message saying like, after review, we're going to go ahead and lower the cost of your book to like whatever. And I was like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because I sent in the notice basically saying, take my book off. I'm leaving your platform. They're like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I am sure. Yeah, you've not been good to me like whatsoever. So I have the book on everywhere but Audible.
Yeah.
And what was funny is that as I was having this back and forth with them, like as soon as I got done doing that, Brandon Sanderson came out with his statement. And I was kind of like, at least, thank you. Like, because a lot of us have been kind of trying to talk about it, and we've been told to shush and that we should feel lucky to be there because we're small authors, right? Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I this was a couple years ago, and I don't even remember who it was, and I should have probably kept track, but I remember coming across someone on like Instagram, and they put up a short or something that was like, I just made the difficult decision to only sell my stuff through my own website. Like they pulled themselves off of Amazon. And they were like, I was really scared about it. I was really like nervous to do it, but I've been making more money and selling more copies than I was through Amazon.
Yeah, I wish I had that reader base because I really want to do that too.
Yeah.
I would. I mean, you can purchase everything on my website right now, but the truth of the matter is that people want to go to low friction areas that are trusted. So remember earlier when I told you that I only work with my editor through Fiverr, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing. So if somebody reads the book that they spent $7 on and they realize it sucks, they want that $7 back so they can go get the latte, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, hey, this has been fun. This has been a really awesome conversation, and really glad we've kind of known each other for a little bit now through social media. So it was nice to finally talk to you in person.
Yeah, it was great.
In person ish.
Yeah. I've been in your state. It's the same thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually my family and I, we just traveled beginning of August, and I was down in we went through the Dallas airport. So
same thing.
Yep. There you go.
Pretty much besties now.
Yeah. So where can we find you? Where's your website and all that social media stuff?
One stop shop, carrowbrown.com. So anything involving me, you can go ahead and find it there. It's got access to all my books that are on there. You can find links to my Audible book. You can find links to my dead YouTube channel. I haven't posted anything on there for a while. And you can also find links to my blog where once a week I post something either related to the published industry or I give some kind of writing advice. So if that's something you're looking for, that's where you can find it.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for watching. My name is Brendan Pugh. This is Carrow Brown, and this has been Writing Quest. Make sure to check out all that stuff. We'll put it in the description of this below, and we will see you next time.
Yeah. Bye. Bye. I'm waiting.